Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our series of Learning to Code with P5. Today, in this video, we will learn about a new concept of loops, which will help us perform repetitive instructions more efficiently. So let's get started. All right, so let's begin. But before we do that, let me remind you to make sure that you have remixed your project. I have already done so. Here I've changed the name as well, so make sure you do that. And I'm keeping the code intact inside just because we're going to build up on our previous example for this to understand the concept of loops. All right, so let's begin. Okay, so if you remember from our previous example, we have created basically a way to generate different kind of random circles on the canvas with different sort of colors and sizes whenever we click our mouse, right? That's what we have done so far. But imagine instead of clicking or creating one circle with each click, maybe you want to create multiples of them, right? What if you wanted to create with each click, you wanted to create 5 of them or 10 of them? What is the best way of going about it? That's what we will learn. One way, and that is definitely not the best way. It is not a good way at all to do it, and it's a very inefficient way of doing things, is that if I literally copy these lines of codes that we have actually created to generate our circles, and we can start working with that. First of all, the error that we are kind of going to be running into, that if we have already declared a variable, we cannot redeclare it, right? It's going to be confusing. So first of all, we have to get rid of all these lets, because we don't want it to declare variables. And I'm going to format this for a second. Okay, so in this case, what we have done is that we have repeated it once more. So now we should be able to see, if you can, we are able to create 2 circles with 1 click at a time, right? Now, what if you wanted to do it like 5 of them or 10 of them? So imagine you are copy pasting it like thrice, 5 times, 10 times. What if you wanted to create 100? Are you going to, repeat your code 100 times? That's definitely not helpful for you or your time. And what if you wanted to go back and change, okay, maybe instead of 100 now, I want 50. Now you're going back and deleting half of them, like, So instead of doing this, this is where the concept of loop is really, really, really helpful. And it's going to go a long way if you are not just working in P5, but also as a concept in any other kind of programming language that you will learn, let's say, moving forward, if you want to learn any other language apart from this one. So let me show you and talk about the syntax. We're going to talk about a couple of types of loops that we will work with. The first one is going to be a bit more similar to what we have done before. So the first one is called while loop. The while loop has this kind of syntax, which is pretty similar to our if condition, right? So you put if here, and then you put your condition and you put your code in it. The only difference is that with while loop, it's going to keep on doing it as long as that condition is being met. So instead of running it once, it's going to repeatedly perform a certain task that you have asked it to do as long as that condition is met. So how can we kind of work around that? Let's just use this as an example, right? So because we want to create, let's say, multiples of circles. So first of all, let's say we have a syntax here, and I'm going to put something inside. So we already know that we are going to use this inside because these are our certain lines of code. Okay, I'll format it, but it might not work because I haven't put the condition inside. So let's go back and do it. So now for what kind of condition that we want to create, right? Remember that the condition needs to be in a Boolean format. So we need to phrase our question in a way that it can answer either in a yes or no. And we need to create some kind of a relation so that it can kind of compare and give us a response that yes, it is working, no, it's not working, and so on and so forth. So let us create a variable for this one. Let's say let counter is 0. And then here we can use this variable with the relational operator, let's say 100. So what I'm saying here is that while the counter, which is this one that's moved, that is 0 at this point in time, is less than 100, you are going to generate these circles. But the problem with this one is that the minute it started with 0, it already is less than 100, right? So in that case, this condition will just not be helpful, just because it is already is going to be 100 and it will stay within within 100. So I mean less than 100. So we need to actually give it an increment value, remember, so that it can kind of move. So what we have done here is, and I need to keep this inside our while loop. Okay, let me try and format this before. Okay, so now it's much more easily legible. Okay, so what we have done here is that we have created a counter. We've assigned it a value 0. And within our condition here in the loop, we have said that as long as the value of the counter is less than 0, you're going to run this code and you're going to increase the counter by 1. All right, so that means that these number of circles are going to be only going to stay within this 100. So let's say if I click once, I am now at this point generating 100 circles at a time. Instead, if I make it a 10, you can see I am now creating 10 circles at a time, right? So that's one way of going about this thing. The thing with the while loop is that it has its own limitations. If you know that the structure is technically quite simple, but we had to create this variable and we had to create a certain sort of like an increment value added to it so that, you know, it can perform that task. Sometimes if the condition is not met, it can get stuck and your program can crash as well. So there are certain uses where we can work with, but most of the times the kind of loop that we will be working with is the next one, which is the for loop. All right, so the difference between the for loop and the while loop is that in the for loop, we are already going to be using 3 things. So that's like 3 key ingredients for the for loop to work. And it gives us a better control over how many times we want the program or we want that code of instructions to be run, right? And we can sort of control that without thinking about it being crashed. I'm not saying that the while loop is not helpful. Of course, it is definitely helpful in certain ways. It's just that we have to be mindful of where we are using both. In our case, we will be using a lot more for loop than the while loop. All right, so I'm going to talk about the structure for a bit. So if you, let me put that in the code and then you can see, but there are these 3 things. First is the counter, or the variable that we've created for the counter. The second thing is the condition, and the third thing is the increment. It is a very shorthand, quick way of writing all these 3 things together in one parentheses as our condition. So this is something not new technically, because we have been doing it for our while loop as well. Let me take this back up and create some space. I'm going to comment this out for now and put our for loop instead, and I'm going to close it because now this is using this one. Okay, so here the first one, if you go back, is the counter, where we will need to create our variable. So we can say let counter is 0. Okay, I have literally picked up this variable, you know. Basically, what I've done is that I have declared a variable and assigned it a value in this first statement. Make sure that within these 3 ingredients, you have to keep them apart by using a semicolon, because if you use a comma or something else, it will give you an error. So you have to be mindful of the syntax that is being used. The second one is going to be the condition. So the condition is going to be this one, something that we have worked with. So if I use this, and I put it in the second part, and then I need an increment value. So that is technically the same thing, which is here. But instead of this, writing in a long way, if you remember, there have been more ways of actually writing the same thing. If you remember, counter plus 1 could also be counter plus equals 1, right? We have learned it in the past that this is also a short way of writing. But imagine if we wanted to add 1 to the counter as an incremental value, there's another way of actually doing that, which is a very shorthand way of doing things. Okay. And this is this one. So I'm going to comment all of these out for now. And in this one, I'm going to use the shortest possible option. Okay, these are all basically just doing an incremental value. Incremental by 1. Okay. Gonna quickly reformat this. All right, so what it is doing is, if we go back and see in our line of code that our instructions are still within these curly brackets, all we have said is in the first ingredient is basically where we have declared and assigned the variable. In the second one, we have already put a condition that needs to be met. And in the third one, what we are saying is that how that variable is being changed, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be only an incremental value. It can, depending on how you've set your condition, maybe it is a decremental. So what it means is that instead of going adding on plus 1, it is going to subtract 1 each time it is performed. Or, you can kind of keep changing, or maybe you don't want it to be just an incremental of 1. And then, you can do it by 5 or 10, however you decide to do. But this is the most sort of things that we wanted to see. So now if you see that I have clicked, all I'm getting is the same thing in a very controlled way, because my variable, my conditions, and my counter incremental values are already built in this for loop as well. Okay, you can do this here, condition by 100, and then let me just pull this. Maybe we can use this as more of space here. And now you can see that, we have a lot of like hundreds of them. You can literally make it 1,000. It's going to be, let this clear it up, and then you have all thousands of them. Okay. So, and I'm going to remove it for now and keep it as 10. So that is the most, let's say, in a very like one line of code, all we have done is that we have used the same line of instructions in our code, and we have put them in this for loop that we have created, right? We just needed one line of code, and now we are able to achieve whatever we want. And even if we want to go back, we don't have to worry. All we need to do is, read, reassign whatever our condition is, and then, it's going to do the job for us. So it's a much more efficient way of doing things. Also, let's just say, if you, again, repeating this in case, you miss your semicolon, if you put it here, it will give you an error because it will not identify. You can do Control-Shift-I or Command-Option-I in your console. You can open that up with that shortcut, and then you can see, it is giving you this kind of error. Sometimes it's not super helpful. Maybe this is not really helpful in telling you what it is or what the error is. Maybe you can read up and figure this out. Also, make sure that you don't need to add any kind of semicolon or anything in between your parentheses and your curly brackets that you are kind of using. So that is that. It might get a little bit of, it will take a little bit of time getting used to this kind of new syntax, but it's going to be super helpful for you in terms of getting lots of things done without repeating these set of instructions and copy pasting your code. So it can really make it more efficient. All right, so I'll let you, practice with this, and maybe you can show me what you, what or how differently you have done something in your code. See you in the next lesson.